Hello, everyone. I'm Robert with Skeptic Philosophy. This is an impromptu video that is made kind of in response to something that I've recently heard. And it's not the first time that I've heard it before. And that's the idea that we might do better off using some emotional ideology or some emotional impulse to convince people of something that is scientifically true. That we should use things or tell things in a more emotionally connective way that attaches to people's intuitive moral understandings of things, for them to accept that as true. I have a problem with that at a fundamental level. And I know everybody comes at different subjects for different reasons, and they have their own motivations as to why they might be pushing along a path. So we might have things that are true in a scientific sense that the educators inside of those fields simply want to express those things in a way, and they're not connecting with people because people have ardent perspectives or biases that are already in place that are making it very difficult to accept things that are scientifically established things or scientifically established facts in some cases. The reason that we should not use emotion as appeal is because this is something that opposition to skepticism, opposition to scientific thinking and just epistemological processes are using these things to start with to get people to convinced of a thing being true. And there is a problem with clouding the line. I think it the case that we should have two primary categories, and I very briefly mentioned this yesterday actually on the live stream, of what reality is. And we should accept all of the things that are purely on a logical basis. So any fact claim that is made, it should be evaluated on a logical basis, not on an emotional basis to determine whether that thing is true. And then there is an emotional basis that makes the decision of what it is that we should do with that information. And the problem is also often people who are trying to deceive, people who are con men, people who have a motivation for you to believe something, and they can't get you to believe these things purely with the facts. They appeal to your emotions to get you to believe these things. And emotions are problematic. They're extremely problematic because they are not proper tools that can come to the correct conclusions. And I'm fixing to open up the stage for a little bit and see if anybody does want to come in on this subject and how they feel about the subject. But I think when we see religious organizations, when we see apologists do this kind of emotional appeal, or even we see the altar calls, and they make a declarative thing that you are a sinner and you are this, and they play on people's emotional guilt, and then they say things like the Lord will forgive you, come down here and come give yourself to Jesus. Are these extremely successful methodologies? They're very successful methodologies, but they are entirely appealing to emotion. And while that does root very deep, it has nothing to do with reaching the truth. And my interest is in an epistemological way, and it's from there is a format to which we can come to the truth that eliminates our biases. There are 5 primary categories that they cause the problems. They are the limiting functions of human knowledge, that we cannot come to proper knowledge because of these 5 categories. The best that we understand them, they're the root of the epistemological problem. The first one is perceptual limitations, that what we are able to perceive, what we are able to intake, and how we're able to translate that. There are extreme amount of problems with the perceptual limitations. That's one of the categories, and it breaches into and it touches a lot of other categories in how we can know a thing. A second thing is pattern limitations. What we do is we take all of the information that we see, we combine that along with all of the information that we have already seen in advance, and then we come to a conclusion. So when we see a round table, for example, I think Bertrand Russell used a square table, but when we see a round table sitting in the center of a room, we don't see it as a round table. We see it at a distance. We see it as an oval table. But we take what we know about our experiences with the lights, our experience with geometry and everything, and we make the conclusion that that is a round table, and that if we were on the top looking down, that it would be a round table. We do this with all aspects of our life. We're taking things and we're comparing it to what we've already seen, and we're using patterns to make conclusions to what is actually going on. So we do have pattern limitations. Our other thing is we have faulty reasoning. We have faulty reasoning formats that we might come to intuitively. One of the best examples of this is ad hoc reasoning, or post hoc ergo proctor hoc, with this therefore because of this, something happens simultaneously, X happens, Z happens, X and Z must be related, or X must be causing Z, and they not necessarily the case. There could be a third thing, or they can be completely independent of one another. They just happen to happen at the same time, and they're not related to one another. So what we do is we come up with different faulty processes that we say, oh, but this, and this leads to a necessary this. And then we have, this is why we have a whole list of logical fallacies that evaluates the strength of using that type of reason to come to a conclusion, and that's a bad reason. So when we have all of our list of logical fallacies, this is because of that faulty reasoning category that it's bad reasoning. It won't get you, it's not a proper equation. And then the fourth one is, this is cognitive bias. We hold things for patently emotional reasons to be true. And that is a type of decay. I would say that one, in memory fallibility, is a type of decay of the truth. Like, you could use the other three things, and if you get them in order, you can understand something. But the corruption of being able to understand that is happening because of biases, specifically cognitive biases. And then the other one is memory fallibility. And there's a lot inside of the category of memory fallibility. Whether that is just your general duplication. Let's say you're talking about a childhood memory, and you have thought about it again. So when you think about a childhood memory, you're making a duplicate of it, and it never has the same resonance as the original. If you add emotional connotation to it, so like if you have this is where rosy remembrance comes in, or rosy remembrance syndrome or fallacy comes in, that you think of childhood as, oh yeah, it was so great, and you remember things fondly, and the more that you reflect on that, then you make duplicate kind of copies of it, and now all of a sudden it has a great outcome. And subsequently, anything that you add to a negative or a positive emotional connotation, you wind up duplicating that every time you're thinking about it, and then you're asked about something and you remember it very differently than it is. There's lots of different categories inside of memory fallibility, as well as just the brain just doesn't completely remember things. And when it's trying to recover information and it has pieces of it, it uses its patternicity to try to fill in all of those pieces and come up to something that's not actually how it went down. All that having been said, these 5 primary things are something that stop us from being able to know information. They're the greatest limiting factors. But biases is something that we use emotions that corrupt these things, specifically because we want an outcome. And this is a game that has been going on in religion since the beginning of time. And our success as a species has only been built on the back of our ability to pull away from these biases and understand things as they are without connectivity of biases. So my interest is not in what the outcome is, that more people believe in this or that. My interest is that we keep honest the equation to how we get to a conclusion, that we have to keep it honest, and we have to keep biases out of it. One of the primary examples that I've used many times, the way the religions use this, is in the book of Hebrews, where we get the definition of faith, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And we see this in the New Testament, where Jesus talks about believing or having faith in something can move a mountain. There are concepts inside of religion, whether they're inside of faith or whether they're inside of tradition in religions. There are concepts that you can believe something so fervently that it will make it so, that it just is the case that it is so. And the problem that I have with this is, hope is a good character for us to have. It's okay for us to hope a thing, but we never need to delude ourselves to thinking that a thing is so. This is where we get characteristics such as gamblers that have chronic gambling problems. Just to apply this outside of the domain of religion, when someone just knows, I just feel it. I just know that I'm going to win. They are corrupting the line between what fact is and what they want things to be. And the greatest thing that can motivate us to change is both holding that a thing is a certain way, that this is what reality is, and I don't want it to be that way. And this is the motivation that gets us to change the things that we don't want to be. But if we simply say, well, because I don't want it to be, that then necessitates its factual aspect, we get tons of problems. We get people who say, well, I don't want climate change to be real, so it's not. Just at an emotional level, they deny things that we need to take action to change them. But you do this just for an emotional reason, to say that this isn't even going on, or that this is this. Now, I want to say in advance that the subject of philosophy and how it has been spread and how it has been educated inside of the school systems, it has greatly failed the other domains of science and of education. When we have people that teach like evolutionary biology, and they feel as if there is a dramatic resistance to people understanding this, and that they're very shut up and they're very cut off, that is not your failing in that department or in that area. That is a categorical failing of the methodology of coming to conclusions. It is a categorical failing inside of educational systems and why we think things are true. That we're not educating JTB models or the tripartite model properly, or how we come to conclusions. And it's not being educated in school systems that we have to separate our emotions away from the conclusions. And that's not a failing of the branch of science, or that's not a failing of evolution or of biology. That's a failing of the education, specifically in this subject in the category of epistemology. And it's something that we do have to do better on. But to say because that fight's not being won, and that fight's losing to emotion because of the social media type of world that we live in, and that we come to conclusions on patently emotional reasons, to say then that we have to give in to that so that we can gain ground or get territory on fact claims, I can't let down the guard on that. I avidly disagree. It should be the case. And I think whenever I mentioned this earlier, I was told that we can't all be robots. And I agree. We can't all be robots. But when we come to things that are true or not true, we have to set our biases aside to decide whether that is really true or not true. Biases have to be, emotions have to be, they have to be set down. They have to be put on the coat rack, and us make decisions purely logical on what is true. And then we can pick them back up at the door and make the decisions on what it is that we do about those things. We get this problem when we talk about the Gettier issue, and how we come to conclusions. When teachers presently get you to do math equations or get you to do any kind of logical process, even if you're at a college university and you're coming to, you're using logical format like prepositional logic, and you come to a conclusion, you'll regularly hear this terminology, and you hear it all throughout school: show your work. That we want you to show your work. And the reason that is because it's important that you not reach the conclusion for wrong reasons. That is more important than the answer itself, is the process. And that is what I want to keep pure. I want to keep the process pure of coming to the conclusions. And we cannot come to fact claims for emotional reasons. It's corrupting the process. Now, as to what I was mentioning about Gettier, when we look at the Gettier clock problem, and Gettier says he sees the clock, I'm sorry if I'm getting too far ahead, but Gettier sees, or the character in this scenario, they see the clock says 2 o'clock. So they have a justification to believe that it is 2 o'clock. It is actually 2 o'clock. And then they believe that it is 2 o'clock. So they have met all three of what they call the tripartite model, or justified, true, believed. It is both justified, it is true, and it is believed. So therefore they call it knowledge. And the reason that when Gettier raised these kind of things and people inside of academic and inside of epistemology pushed back on this and said, I think Gettier's right. I think this is an example of where the JTB model was met, but we still don't call it knowledge. And the reason that we don't call it knowledge is because they have accidentally come to the right conclusion. They have accidentally come to the right conclusion that it was two. And intuitively, the people that are involved in epistemology reject that that's knowledge, because you can't come to knowledge accidentally. You don't accidentally get it right. You have to have followed the process. And if you didn't follow the process, then it's not knowledge. And when you start believing things for emotional reasons, you have broken the process and it isn't knowledge. We see a very similar quote from this about the axioms of morality from Abraham Lincoln, actually, to a news editor who made a comment about something that Abraham Lincoln done. And he said that famous quote. He said, I believe it is an established maxim in morals. He who asserts a thing to be true without knowing it to be true is guilty of falsehoods, and the accidental truth of its assertion does not justify or excuse him. They have to do the work. You have to get to the conclusion the right way. And while I understand that using emotional things or using stories in a little bit of way that we change them a little bit to get somebody to a conclusion might be very appealing, and maybe very appealing so that we can get everybody on the same side of conclusion, but it just isn't the right way. It's not showing you work. It isn't getting there honestly and correctly. So I think we have to hold the line on the process of how we come to conclusions, because if we don't, there is no conclusion that we cannot get to using emotion. So when we arrive at the place that we say, okay, we have a fact, how do we know it is a fact if we have not eliminated our biases when we take the path to get to it? How do we know that it is a fact if that's what we've done, if we've cheated, if we haven't followed the systemic program of how we come to a conclusion of things? This is my big problem with using emotion in these categories. That having been said, if anybody does want to come up here, I will open it up. Hey, now, how's it going, folks in chat? I'm going to put a comment on here, see if anybody else has something to say on this. I just very recently heard this, and it's not the first time. I have heard it before, whether we're talking about something inside of branches of biology or in physics or other things. I don't think it's the right methodology. We have to purely use logic to come to conclusions and come to what's right. We have to check our biases at the door. We're just messing up. And there's nothing that aims us. We can be wrong. We can be wrong about our conclusions. The only thing that gives us our honesty and our integrity is that we check our emotions at the door and we use logical processes to come to these conclusions. And then when we get to these conclusions, we can say, yes, what do I do with this information now? What can I take this information? What do I want to be the case? And we can, as the old adage says, be the change that we want to see in the world. But we have to first know what is true. And you can't get there with emotions. Now, that being said, no one's a robot. You can try to be the single most logical person and never use emotions and suppress it entirely. You can do that. And emotions are such a part of the human nature that they will always just come through. It doesn't matter. You can't hold them down. They're an aspect of what it is that is the human consciousness. So it doesn't matter if you try to be Data here or Spock and the completely logical individual. That's not how our cognitive framework is built. Emotions will come through. We have to beat them back into the closet when we're trying to find out the truth of matters. We have to beat them back and stow those things while we come to the conclusions of what reality is. And then we can go from there. Any thoughts on this, on the subject? I didn't want to make this a huge thing. I had very recently heard this and someone asked me about my comments on it, and I made a few comments inside of the post, but it was very short-lived inside of the video that I was chatting on. But that's where I'm at on it. If anybody has any opposition to this or any thoughts on this, by all means, please come in. There should be a link posted on there. Nothing in chat. It doesn't got quiet now. I see I got 5 viewers here, but I was only making a quick video on the subject. If anybody else has any thoughts on it, on whether that line should be drawn very firmly to divide that, please give me your thoughts on it. Some matters depend entirely on emotional thoughts. In those conditions, you have to appeal to emotion to convince people to change their position. Sure, but that's not of a fact claim. I would agree, but not of a fact claim. You get them to change their position on what it is that they would do. You can appeal to emotions to for someone to decide what is right or wrong in a given situation in terms of moral intuitions, whether we're talking about stuff like immigration policies or even vegetarianism or things like this. There's no doubt these are subjects that, but when I make a fact claim, and it doesn't need to be a purely mathematical claim of what X is or what the properties of something is, I in no way, shape, or form would ever appeal to you for emotional reasons to make you conclude of what a mathematical equation should be the result of. And if I am doing that, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's not logic. Whatever it is, it ain't logic. Emotions and logic are two very different things. They kind of operate different hemispherically. So they're very different things, and emotion is a subject that has to be put to the side when we come to conclusions. But I do think you're right in terms of what actions we should take or whether we should do something or our investment. I think even when we're talking about subjects of like whether we should get involved in a war or we should not get involved in a war, there are things that need to be to some degree appealed to for emotional reasons. It's just not fact claims. I cannot draw that line firm enough. It is, if there is on this side of the subject a great moral conviction that I have, it is that. And it's probably the reason that I have that conviction is because I came out of a religion. I was what they commonly refer to as a fundie or a fundamentalist. And when I came out of that and I started making the conclusions that this isn't right, this is incorrect, and I have believed all these things for emotional reasons, when I was finally away from it and I was ignorant of the world and ignorant of how anything worked, I didn't want to trust anything else again. I could always be wrong. I could be as deceived and as ignorant about there not being a God as I was about this specific religion being correct. I could be wrong. And the only thing that could give me any confidence is that I need to build up that wall of against emotion and say, let's come to conclusions for purely logical reasons. So that wall has been built very firmly for me of what things are true and what things are not true should be separated. And then what we should do with those things, that we could deal with that at an emotional level. That having been said, it looks like Antangelo wants to come in here. I'm going to bring Antangelo in. Antangelo, how goeth it?
Yes, I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Very well. Yourself, man? Yeah, you heard it said.
Yeah, so to your topic, should we use emotion to convince people of something? I don't think so. I think we should use reason.
Good. Glad I'm in agreement on. Glad we're in agreement on that. Even if we are on completely different sides of the subject of theology or whatnot, I don't like the ideal of using emotion. I heard this inside of the context of evolution and evolutionary biology, and that the fight is being lost in this subject. And I don't know where you stand on it, but the very thought of using something like that to me inside of sciences, it hurt. It hurt. It just corrupts the process. Yeah, that's a very firm line for me. A very firm line.
Yeah, as you said, we are on the same page on this. I think that we all are all seekers of truth. We want to know what the truth is in regards of origins, and that of course includes biodiversity. How did biodiversity come to be? How is it that there are millions of different species dwelling on Earth? And we have basically two competing hypotheses. One is that animals and creatures were created, special creation by an intelligent creator. and the other is that natural evolutionary processes are responsible to get to this biodiversity that we have here. And I think
Yeah,
that
I understand the
correct.
theological side of that. I do, but I don't think that even those people that are in the religious side, and maybe yourself as well as others, they wouldn't have got to that conclusion if they couldn't have stowed some of their emotional side. They wouldn't have got to it. We would have had an entirely the entire branch of religion would have still been, no, we were created. So whenever I see things like St. Augustine's kind of reproof back against people of creationists of his time, and people who were making claims that the Bible was kind of a scientific declaration, I appreciate that from him. That and I don't know if you know the text that I'm talking about, where St. Augustine is talking about the creation story, how everything got here. We're not talking about evolution yet, but he's pushing back against all of the scientific claims of how the Earth arose and whatnot.
Well, I think we should look at how apologists today actually um, approach the issue, and not only apologists, but I would say anyone that defends that the creator was necessary and is probably the best explanation for biodiversity. And I think that intelligent design theory has a superior epistemological approach by saying we don't start with a religious book. We don't start with the Bible or any other religious book. We start with the evidence. What is the evidence? And then you have it on the table, and then what are the options to explain what we have here, what science has unraveled? And then you have basically two categories which oppose each other. One is that an intelligent creator or mind was necessary, and on the other side, not.
I'll
And in
tell
order
you,
to,
I don't mean to go too far on this subject. And the reason that I mention that is because I know that to some degree we all have our own individual narratives on the subject. My interest is less in the conclusions of the things that we come to and more in the processes and the integrity of the processes that we use to come to those. And that's kind of why the video was titled the way that it is. I appreciate that from your side that you say that we should not use emotions in determining what reality is. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. And I appreciate that more and more coming from your side. I would appreciate that our side of this conversation hold that line without flinching, that we have to come to these conclusions for logical reasons and not emotional reasons. But as far as the first cause and how we could know what the first cause is, I don't think that we could ever bridge that gap between me and you as to say that we know that there is an intelligent thing, therefore that was the first cause. That seems to some degree have the residue of emotion that is reaching a little far to get to that.
well, I don't make absolute claims, Robert. What I'm
Good.
saying is that, first of all, we need, and I fully agree with you on this, a solid epistemological framework to actually start to make the investigation of origins. And that includes excluding emotion, and of course also excluding bias. And I think that we all have bias. Every one of us has a certain preference to any kind of worldview, and we should work on it to remove it, to put it on side and say, well, I want to be strictly honest, and I don't care what my preference is. I just want to know what is the truth.
Yes.
And how can we reach that truth? And then you need indeed to construct first a reasonable framework upon which you can make this investigation. And I have always said that in my view, there are two main things which are a problem when I debate atheists. One is a false or wrong set of epistemological framework, and the second is the lack of understanding of actually scientific issues. And when an atheist tells me,
pause you
well,
right there.
can you prove that God exists? Then I say, well, you just start wrong because we have no proofs.
Okay, well, good. Then I don't know that we're compelled beyond that, because the only thing that it seemed would compel us beyond proof is emotion. And again, I don't want to hold something true for emotional reasons. I think you're getting a little bit of slack here in the side chat here. Anyone that wants to come in here and disagree with either one of us, you're very welcome to do so. I do want to say this in advance. This isn't Taco's channel, and we don't yell over people and do all of that shit. So anyone's welcome to come in here and have a conversation, but let's keep it simple.
Yeah, I think, again, Robert, we are on the same page in regards that reason is a good tool that we need to use to come to reasonable conclusions. And second, you need a reasonable epistemological framework. And I think what many atheists get wrong is when they use scientism or verificationism in their toolbox. And when they say, well, can you prove me that your God exists? And when I say, no, I cannot, well, then why should I believe it? Then I say, well, that's the wrong approach, because nobody has proofs in regards of ultimate reality. You cannot prove that no God is
so do you think that it
necessary.
should be just a tacit default thing, or do you I'm trying to see how you get the gap closed from I don't have a way to prove a thing to we should still believe the thing. And I don't understand how to cross that gap and not cross every other gap of that which we cannot know.
Yeah,
So
I explained
if
it
you're
to you.
saying, if you're saying, okay, because of the emotional appeal or because of some internal sensation or something like that, that I can get across the gap of I cannot prove to I still hold it to be so, then let's just say that. Let's just say there's an emotional connotation there. If that's not what's there, then how are you getting from that which you cannot know in any epistemological sense to this thing should still be held to be true, and you can't get from there to this other thing should be held to be true,
Yeah.
such as Zeus or fairies or any other claim, the teapot in the sky. You know, how do you get from here to here?
I get where you're going with that, Robert. So I think I have a clear answer to that. Again, we can say that the qualifier of a deity is at least I use a minimal descriptor of my deity. He's eternal, powerful, intelligent, and a person. And the main thing is intelligent. And when you have on the one side an agent which has intelligence, and we know what intelligence can do, and on the other side you have a qualifier of a cause which is not intelligent, then you have a clear contrast. Then what can you do? You can investigate, well, what are the qualifiers or abilities that intelligence has that non-intelligence doesn't have? And when you have cleared the doubt, then you can look into the world.
Well, let me give you the biggest qualifier that I've ever noticed with anything that comes about by intelligent design. The biggest qualifier is a minimal of waste. When we even make a house, the amount that will be thrown away is less than a quarter of the materials that is going into it. So the problem that we have when we're talking about like a creator created this earth and we have a universe that is, I can't even proportion how much is it necessary. Let's say that 99.999 for 1,000 digits is wasted material that doesn't seem to have anything to do with this planet and the living organisms on it. So that to me is apparent to something like a driveway that has thousands and thousands of rocks in it, and one of them has a shape to you that is favorable, and you pick it up. Does it mean that was designed, or does it mean that just in the aggregate of the numbers, of the sheer numbers, that we got something that was operational? And when people tell me that it was intelligently designed, but the waste alone is just, it's more proportionate to that which is not intelligently designed, I immediately have a problem.
Yeah. You know, what I think is you cannot just put one objection into the game and say, oh, I see this problem. It seems that there is too much waste, therefore things are not designed. This is the bad design.
I know you know that's not the only objection in the game, though, Antangelo. I know that you know there are hundreds of objections, whether we're talking about the ideal of the entity being all loving and we're talking about the problem of evil or every other problem that's in the game. This is not alone in the bag of problems.
No, I just qualified as a contrast to the no design hypothesis that God has basically three qualities. He's eternal, powerful, and intelligent. Just that. And I contrast, I contrast that to the hypothesis no God, which has none of these qualities. And one specific qualifier is intelligence. So we can make a list, I have done that, of several hallmarks of design. And intelligent design theory has four specific legs, let's say. One is irreducible complexity, the other is specified complexity, the third is fine tuning, and the fourth is foresight. So these are things which we know that intelligence is capable of to exercise these things, to instantiate things which are instructional complex, which are irreducibly complex, things which are fine-tuned for specific purposes, and foresight to create something where you need foresight to know what it's needed to get a specific result. So we know that intelligence has these qualities.
I agree.
Now,
intelligence has those qualities. Do I see any of those qualities in a way that is meaningful or cannot be explained in another sense? I don't. Kurt, I don't know how much you've addressed any of these things, and I apologize. This is Kurt coming in here. Les, please, I know y'all might have had some blood in the past, but if we could try to keep it civil as possible. But how's it going, Kurt?
Oh, it's good. Otangelo, I think before we get into the evidentiary case, I think it's important to structure with as little as motion as possible. I agree. The epistemology here. So should we begin with the basic assumptions that the present is the key to the past, or should we assume nothing about the past?
Well, I think that the present is very important in order for us to come to solid conclusions. In other words, what is the path to the cause.
Well, that's not really answering my question, though. The general assumption in both geology and biology typically has been that the present is the key to the past, that there have not been any substantial breaks where the rules of biology and physics were altered in the past, and they work the way they do now as they always have. So I think that's a standard axiomatic move made in both geology and biology, and I'm wondering if you accept that or not.
Yeah, I do.
Bottom-up causation, I think, or bottom-up understanding of the causation, the state of which is now. We have to understand the state before it, but we have to build from the bottom up, the present being, and not start from some presupposition of what we think the beginning might have been.
Well, one of the axioms or presuppositions is that the world is stable, that we can make sense of it based on that fact that it is predictable and stable.
So would you postulate then that we see evidence of divine creation in today's world?
Well, if I wouldn't be a creationist or intelligent design proponent.
All right. So which species have we seen divinely created in our lifetimes or in the lifetime of previous scientific observations?
Yeah, so this comes precisely to what I criticized just a few minutes back with Robert, where I said that in order for you to come to solid conclusions in regards of origins, you need to have a solid epistemological framework. And one of the very often seen failures or wrong applications is scientism or verificationism. That is, first of all, nobody has a time machine to go back and see what happened in the past. Nobody can sense a deity with our senses. So again, that's why I say what is the path to the cause, one thing, and second, I use abductive reasoning or inference to the best explanation.
Yeah, so I agree we don't have a time machine, but we do have tree rings, we do have varves at the bottoms of lakes, we do have ice cores, and those all tell us a fairly consistent story, and that story aligns with the idea that the present and the past don't share any sharp discontinuities. We also see the current rate of continental motion on the tectonic plates as like being somewhat variable, but in fairly low ranges. And so if we use those like current existing pieces of evidence, and we simply use the axiom that we've talked about, that the present is the key to the past and there's no sharp discontinuity, that certainly gives us no evidence that we can see of any divine creation events.
Yeah, I am very much someone which supports hard science and not soft science. That means that the prime issue that we want to elucidate on a bottom line is if there is a creator or not. And what you are addressing is more kind of the quest of old Earth, young Earth, and this kind of stuff, which I think is much more difficult to elucidate, much more nebulous. And that's why I don't like very much to go into these discussions. I prefer much, much more to establish what are clear signs of intelligence, that we know that intelligence
What's the
can
imperative of this?
instantiate, that
Angelo?
non-intelligence cannot instantiate.
What's the imperative of coming to this conclusion? Like, does it matter if we don't come to the conclusion of a God? Or do you think that there's an imperative? And how did you get to the imperative?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean with imperative?
Is there a particular reason that we need to come to the conclusion that there is a God?
Oh, I think this is one of the most fundamental and important questions that we can make in our life.
How so? How does it operate anything that we do?
Well, because first of all, I mean, we all want to know, well, why are we here? And is there meaning of life? And this question is answered in a very different way.
Now, how are you getting meaning? I'm sorry. Are you saying that not only that you've come to the conclusion that there is this entity that created us, but that he has a specific purpose for us? And how did you get to that? Was that purely logical?
Absolutely. I mean, I am a Bible-believing Christian, and I think that the Bible makes the revelation why God created this world. And it's stated very clearly when the Pharisees asked Jesus, well, what is the first and foremost command? What was his answer? Love God with all your heart, with all your strength, with whatever you have, wholeheartedly, and love your next as yourself. What do we extract from this? I extract from this that the meaning of life is that that God created us because he loves us. He wants that we love him, and he wants that we love each other. That is the essence of.
Yeah, I'm done with that. I'm sorry. The whole point of this was, and I apologize, Antangelo, but yeah, the whole point of this was that we don't appeal to emotion, then come to conclusions, and you came in under the premise that that's the line that you were walking, and then we immediately think that it's just not the case. So when you're talking about all this, that it's all to love Jesus and all this, that, and the other, we're not coming to conclusions then for purely unemotional reasons. I'm not gonna do it. It's not what the video is about. Maybe some other time. That having been said, Kurt, good talking to you. Anybody else wants to come into stage and see what y'all feel about the subject of bringing emotion in? Kurt, this happened because I was watching a video with some biologist or a biologist in training and someone who teaches evolutionary biology, saying that we were kind of failing in that in the subject of evolutionary biology, and the subject of creationism is kind of winning, and that maybe we should use models that have more logical or more emotional appeal to teach these things. And I was just ardently against that.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated issue, right? If you want to convince people, I think you do need to use the logos, ethos, and pathos. That's a fairly established pattern, but you kind of have one hand tied behind your back when you can only tell the truth. And that is like a less fair strategy. But that said, I do think the standard scientific apperception of what's going on in the world has a certain emotional appeal, right? like when Otangelo was just talking there, I was thinking to myself, this idea would make sense if people in monarchies felt like they had more meaningful lives than people in democracies. But I don't think that's objectively true, right? Worshiping a monarch doesn't make the people in the kingdom feel better about themselves. It just makes them have blind loyalty to a monarch. It doesn't derive them any meaning.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm interested in the like the format, and I don't know how much you were listening to like how we come to conclusions, and even like with the you getting to a conclusion accidental was like why we didn't accept the Gettier cases as okay, then it's not knowledge, in the Gettier cases, such as with the clock that it's 2:00 and we hold it to be 2 and we have justification, but we're getting it there accidentally, and we're not getting there through proper justification. And it seems to me that we can't use emotion as justification to hold a fact claim. And if that just is the case, then it seems that it has to be universally the case that's just not the process. That's not justification to get to a fact claim. So if we're using
Absolutely, I agree that it's never justification for a fact claim. You need the logos, but it might help push salience to get to a fact claim through the logos, but then push it with some pathos. Because, like, to me, the way I view it is that my continuous existence, my ship of Theseus, has been around since the last universal common ancestor, right? I'm literally the product of a life that's been alive on this planet for 3.7 billion years. That's amazing to me. That has a certain amount of pathos to it. And I think it's a cool way to think about things. And like when I have kids, my kids are going to be part of that long process. That's one way to look at it. But all of these things are just levels of analysis, and they may or may not be true in the way people want them to be. But I feel like that's the main reason people often make decisions based on weak evidence, like free will versus determinism. Now, most of that's not decided on the basis of the facts of the case, but what people wish to be the case.
Yeah. And I see this. There's not a scripture, and I've mentioned it before, but I don't think there's a scripture more than like the Hebrews one, with the faith as the substance of things hoped for, as if just hoping that it would be so, that it makes it somehow substantive, or that faith is substance in some sense, just because we hope for a thing, if we hope for it enough. That and whether that's a translational issue, it's how churches take it regularly, at least fundamental churches that I've been a part of. They take it that we can just believe it enough. And we've even heard these things, well, that something didn't happen because you didn't believe it enough, that you didn't have enough faith in it, otherwise it would have been the case. And this isn't logic. This isn't logic at all. This is counterintuitive to logic.
Yeah, no question about the idea that I think Hebrews is taking the Greek and making a new definition for faith, because my reading of the tradition prior to Hebrews is that pistis in koine simply meant confidence, or like you would have trust in a workman to do the job correctly. You would have trust in a ship captain to get you to the destination. And those were the kinds of things that people described as pistis in the literature of the time. So I think Hebrews is making a new definition, and that was not the understanding at that time.
Yeah, but it's not an unprompt definition when we see like in Matthew and even in Mark, when we're seeing him talk to Peter and saying, that you could walk on water with enough, faith, or that you could, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, that you could tell this mountain to move and it would move. It's so the idea that just believing that thing enough that could make it so, coming up to that conclusion, it's not unprompted to come to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, on my timeline, the gospel writers are aware of the epistles, and they're using the terminology of the epistles to illustrate the ideas in the epistles. So okay. I still think Hebrews is doing a neologism, but the other thing is that in Paul Paul uses a phrase, pistis Christou, which is translated usually faith in Christ, but actually can be translated as the faithfulness of Christ. And when you translate it that way, it basically means that members of the Christian church are going to be put under the faithfulness of the Christ figure and not necessarily express belief in Christ in the way that modern evangelicals view it as the sinner's prayer, right? And from my point of view, that makes a lot more sense of the text and is probably a more correct reading, and therefore would be much less emotional in the first and second century than we view it as being emotional today.
You want to ask all these questions? Come on in here, JL. The water's fine. JL had a question for you.
I don't know that it's a fallacy. I mean, they're using a word in English that's had that meaning for centuries. They just don't take the idea that God wrote a book seriously enough to learn the facts about the language the book was written in, which is, I don't know that there's one way people have to be, but I do think it's odd that if people think God wrote a book, they don't want to know the languages that he wrote it in.
Yeah, certainly. And it's something that you get out of Christianity that you don't see out of, you don't really see out of like Islam. They try to keep it purely, to keep it purely in that language.
They do, absolutely. But even there, again, I've always said, like, books are just a terrible way for a God to get his ideas across, because the thought world of the people who write the book, like, let's assume these were all written in English and they were all written in modern English, but they were written by people who understood the world in the first and second century, and all the words were perfectly exactly what they meant. We still wouldn't understand them in the way that they understood them, because we understand the world differently.
Sure, I've heard an argument that has been made before that that any real God would want the maximum amount of communication and expression, and that books wouldn't be the right way. That we reject claims of God's like now, but in reality, this would be the best time, like, for God to make a YouTube video, so to speak. That this would be more expressive and more. You wouldn't lose things inside of communications as much. But that obviously we're also inside of a time of reason where everybody's going to just reject that God character and say that's not God. So, but logically, it would entail that it would make more sense if it happened now rather than thousands of years ago, and be translated through multiple different iterations and books.
Yeah, and I think Scientology is a good test case here, because Ron Hubbard is writing in modern English of 50 to 70 years ago, and it's not as if there's no dispute about what he wrote, what he meant, what his ideas were, and he wrote like billions of words. I don't know if it's billions, but he wrote a huge amount, and there's still much conflict about what he actually meant among the people who actually think he has something to say.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of who the comedian was. The redheaded comedian said that he just couldn't get on with Ron Hubbard. It takes away some of the grandeur when you have video of a guy stubbing his toe.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I was just going to make a short video on this subject because I heard it, and I hope it's not the direction that anyone thinks that we should go, that we should try to appeal to people's emotion for fact claims. I do believe that there's not a problem appealing to people's emotion. I just don't like the idea of doing it for a fact claim. Like, X is a true thing. We should come to it for logical reasons. And then we should decide what it is we do with those. So if you talk to somebody about something that they don't like, and I would think the vast majority of people, whether they believe it's happening or don't believe it's happening, they don't want it to happen. That's climate change. Climate change is something that we have to understand from a logical position, though. We can't understand it emotionally. And if we come to this with, it's not happening because I don't want it to happen, it's a great detriment. It's a great detriment to our species that this is going on. So I got one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to the degree that somebody is making an argument on the basis of emotion alone, that's always problematic. But if there's a logos-based like fact pattern, and then you can add emotion, like we're literally destroying the world that our children and grandchildren will inhabit, I think that's a perfectly reasonable usage.
Yeah.
To try to
but it's a separate subject, isn't it, though, Kurt? I mean, it's a separate subject. It's a subject like this is what reality is, and then this is what we should do because this is what reality is. That's not the same subject. And I don't like the two being blended together. You have to know what reality is first. That's the foundation. You have to know, and then you can do what it is that you want, interact with that in a way that is reflective of your wants and needs as a society. Like be the change you want to be, but you got to know the truth first. And once we establish that, then we can say, okay, now that you know that that's happening, what are you going to do about it? And then there's this self-reflection of, shit, I don't want this to happen. What can I? I don't like the ideal of blending the two together. The fact claim exists independent.
Well, here's a question for you, Robert. Do you think that emotions don't play into that fact gathering at all?
No, I think they do. I just think that, hey, Donnie, by the way, I apologize. Thanks for popping in. I think that we have to hold that back as much as possible, though. Like there's nothing that we could do in like logical equations or math or prepositional logic that would encompass or use emotion. And that's their purity, that they've kept emotion out of them.
Well, I think what I'm driving at is we make novel observations and then we create tests, and then those tests give us answers to questions, right? So that's the
Sure.
empiricism side of things, and what you would refer to as logos in this instance, I think. So that driving force starts from an intuition, which is driven by human emotion. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I think it's an intuition of a nature of what's going on. I don't think it's emotional per se. Like we might have an intuition about fire being hot or whatnot because we feel, we felt something. I'm not sure where we kind of draw the line between intuition and just something that would make us think that might be the case.
There's an interesting book on this topic you might enjoy, and I don't know if you've ever read it or not, but it's called Descartes' Error, and it's written by a physician, Antonio Damasio. He does spend a lot of time on Hume's position that reason is properly the slave of the passions. And what he identifies is that, yes, that's correct that we can use reason and logic to understand a given area, but that what we focus on will be driven by emotional salience and
absolutely, what we pick to
drivers.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, is that I don't see ever removing those passions and the pathos from it. So to try and do so is dismissive of the goal in the first place.
Donnie, we have this conversation in this atheist sphere because this is something that does have an emotional connotation to us. I'm of no illusion of that. The whole reason that we even talk about this is for emotional reasons that we're talking about it. But the conclusions that we should come to should not be driven by emotions. It is what it makes us interested in the subject, and then we deal with it at a logical level. And while I get to some degree the operations even of science of observing and doing another action, making a hypothesis, doing an action to test this, you're going to have inside of this loop, you're going to have emotions are determining even what it is that we're interested in, why we care about it whatsoever. But it should not be inside of the determination of the fact claim itself. There can be facts that are true we don't give a shit about, and we might not ever even know those facts because we haven't been, compelled to try to learn those things. And I grant that.
How would you go about setting that aside in a meaningful way to make sure it's not impacting your data?
That you have to be knowledgeable, first of all, that you have biases and that you have to try to suspend those at every corner. This is why we test things over and over rather than just doing them a single time and then, oh, well, that is in alignment with my bias. You can test something 5 times or 3 times or 100 times. And if you test it 3 times and you get the answer you want, the old adage is from salespeople, when you get a yes, get the pen out. There's no more reason to talk. So this is not why we test things over and over. We test things over and over because it might have at this level confirmed our biases, and then we could stop it. But the reason that we go further is because our biases might be playing that role to say, hey, stop here. We got the result that we want.
Would it be fair to say that the desire to retest in this situation is driven by a fear of being incorrect and as such is emotional?
Correct. Our desire for our want for truth cannot be disconnected from emotion. It just can't, Donnie. You either want the truth or you don't have a desire for the truth. So if we want the truth, we start with that. That's what we want. We want the truth.
So doesn't it seem important then, if we can never divorce our desires from what we're actively pursuing?
How are they not divorced though for coming to the conclusion though? It's determining what it is that we want to know, but it's not determining what the thing that we know.
Well, even in your
Johnny, just 1 second, if I can like make a point, like that's one of the reasons we prefer quantification in mathematics. Like, I think Pythagoras thought that he developed a wonderful, like beautiful theorem and was very happy with it. But the reason it's stuck around is because it builds bridges and aqueducts, like, and allows us to determine things that we could never otherwise determine. So I do think that math like earns its keep in both keeping things somewhat more rigorous than they might be otherwise, and also in getting rid of emotional responses or like emotionally charged valence statements that don't have mathematical rigor.
Yeah, we'll never have a disagreement on math that we have passions involved in it, that we're passionately disagree with the outcome of that mathematical conclusion. We just don't, because we might not like the conclusion, but we don't look at the math and say this and this doesn't equal this for emotional reasons. It seems for the most part, we might turn our head away from the outcome that it come up with because we don't like the outcome, but we don't attack any particular part of math and say this equation is wrong and for emotional reasons.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that from like a fact basis, but once you've established facts, how do you articulate them in a meaningful way that will cause other people to act on them?
Yeah, we just have to know what the fact is. That's emotion. That's like, so let's say, for example, this is the whole alt problem over and over. Let's say that we have established and that everyone on the planet agrees that climate change, for example, is happening. It's happening and that it's a fact thing. And we have a few different models. We can't know for sure what the timing is. And we have a lot of variations and we can't tell for sure, but we know that it's happening and we know that it's man-made. Let's say that everyone knows that. And some people just doesn't give a shit. That is where we have to have the conversation to make people care. But if it's not the same conversation to make people believe that it is the case, that you have to appeal to them for logic reasons that it is the case. And then you go from, look, we got to do something about this and that we have to make sacrifices about it and so forth and so on. But that's not the same conversation.
Well, that's part of the interpretation of math too. Like, right? If the math then dictates and says, well, you know, the city of Calcutta is going to be submerged underwater and nearly 500 million people are going to be left homeless. And this is all going to happen because, you know, people keep driving big trucks. You can drive a certain amount of behavior change on the basis of the facts and their emotional implications.
I suppose. Was I overly rude to Antangelo here?
No, not from my perspective.
Okay.
No, you didn't interrupt.
I'm trying to be nice.
Cut him off.
But yeah, I don't think it was about like he came under one veil and then he began to operate under a totally different. I thought it was intellectually dishonest, and I didn't want to keep engaging with it. But
I think you handled it perfectly.
Okay, good. Yeah, man, I appreciate y'all stopping by. I was only going to make a short video on the subject to see, but I think where I'm at right now is I don't mind using like emotional scenarios and like how we explain evolution, especially when you're talking to children or whatnot, like how we explain how the process is going on. But should we convince them that a fact claim is true for emotional reasons? I'm never going to come around to that. I can't see myself coming around to that anyway. If I could be convinced for emotional reasons, perhaps I'm already failing. But.
Well, there's one other area that I do think it does matter, though. I think if you can make something emotionally salient, it becomes much easier to remember. So I think what like mnemonic experts usually do is like they'll have a house that they know really well that's like familiar to them and they understand it, and then they'll place things they want to remember mentally within that house, and then they'll remember what room to look, and then they'll be able to find it in there. And it's because that gives them that limbic system salience type
Oh,
of
absolutely.
thing. And
There's
again,
an even easier
cool.
example than this, Kurt, that we do all the time at a child level, and that is singing the ABCs, for children to sing the ABCs. They
Right.
sing that and they remember it, and they remember it fondly, and they want to be able to sing it with other kids and whatnot, and it helps them remember their ABCs. I'll grant you that. That is a way that we are getting memory going on for emotion, but that is still the subject of memory, and it's not the subject of concluding what a fact is. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it. I mean, they still are two different subjects, aren't they, Kurt? I mean, memorizing something, and it's not like ABCs are a fact thing. There's not a fact claim of ABCs, except that it is a fact that we as a society accept this we accept this alphabetic system, right? That's the only fact inside of ABCs.
Yeah, I think just human nature is that anything with an attached emotional salience is felt stronger and remembered better.
Fair enough. I completely agree. It is remembered better if it's attached to a emotion. I appreciate you gentlemen stopping by. Again, I wasn't going to run this very long, but I thank y'all. I'm fixing to be out of here, but good talk to y'all. Everyone stay skeptical.